Welcome to Experiments in Leadership, practical insights for Caribbean business leaders. Hi, welcome to Experiments in Leadership and to another episode in our Cyber Resilience for Business Leaders series. I'm your host, Anthony Subero. Today's episode is designed specifically for board members, those entrusted with the ultimate oversight and strategy control through effective governance for organizational performance, sustainability, risk management, and reputation. Now, this episode is not about technical depth. It's about governance, judgment, and leadership under pressure as it relates to your organization's cyber resilience maturity. And this is leveraging my experience as a former and current board member of many organizations, a former chief risk officer of a Caribbean financial institution. I'm a cyber resilience thought leader and CEO of a global cybersecurity company where I advise many boards, but more importantly, as a chief executive officer and co-founder of a company that also responsible to other partners and shareholders. So with this experience, I'd like to simplify what can often feel overwhelming because despite lengthy cybersecurity policies and risk charters and frameworks, board accountability in cyber risk, in my opinion, comes down to three areas of accountability. Number one, oversight of cyber risk. Cyber risk is no longer a technical issue. It's now a top 10 enterprise risk alongside financial, operational, reputational, and legal risk. One may even argue, including compliance, right? Therefore, boards must ensure cyber risks are identified, measured, and managed as it relates to your risk tolerance level of your organization. Now, this is not optional oversight. In fact, to me, it's a fiduciary responsibility as a board member. Accountability number two, focus on resilience and not just protection. Now, there is a critical distinction between the two. Cybersecurity equals protection. Cyber resilience equals recovery and continuity. Or from a simple business context, cyber resilience speaks to business continuity under an attack. Therefore, based on that statement, boards must ask their management two questions. One, can the business continue operating during a breach? And how quickly can we recover? Because prevention alone is not sufficient. In fact, there is no 100% guaranteed protection by any system or any service provider. Therefore, all organizations should also be prepared for when you are attacked. And accountability number three, ensure executive responsibility. Cyber risk responsibility must exist at the management level, and typically this sits with the Chief Information Security Officer. But titles matter less than clarity of responsibility, and so as a member of your board or collectively as a board, you must ensure a defined cyber resilience plan exists for your organization that is linked to business outcomes, adequate funding to execute that plan, and that accountable executives has the authority and direct board visibility to not only ensure direct communication decisioning, but the optics of the board's commitment towards cyber resilience maturity of your organization. Now, these responsibilities may sound simple, or accountabilities may sound simple, but failure in execution has proven costly, and I'm going to share a couple of one situation where governance was poor as it relates to cyber resilience, and a couple examples of when it worked very well in terms of effective governance. So let's talk about where it failed. Equifax, you may remember that reported data breach that existed in 2017. And just to bring everybody on the same page, Equifax is a global credit card processor and a global credit score provider. So, for example, in the United States and Canada, if you apply for a loan or a lease, all right, they would access the service of Equifax to determine where your credit score sit to determine whether or not you could qualify for any type of loan or lease. Now, coming out to the findings from that data breach, a couple of things or a few things were highlighted. The first thing is that there existed unpatched known vulnerabilities on their critical systems. In simple terms, there were vulnerabilities that definitely the security team would have been aware of, but took no action, and the attackers were able to optimize the vulnerabilities that ultimately led to the data breach. There was no effective escalation, meaning that those vulnerabilities were not reported to senior management and, by extension, the board, which really led to poor board visibility. What was the impact? Well, 147 million individuals were affected by this attack, with over 450 million US dollars in penalties were applied to Equifax. Let's talk about examples of good governance. All right, so when Satya Nadella became the chairman and chief executive officer of Microsoft, he drove a significant shift where the company was focused primarily on cyber risk. Well, not primarily, but it would have been a key pillar, and for there's obvious reasons, right? At that time, Microsoft, I think, had commanded close to 50-60% of the world market as it relates to productivity tools, and of course, being that provider and being used that frequently, they would have been, or their solutions would have been, targets for attackers. What he did is he elevated cyber to board priority. He established a clear direct engagement with the security leadership and business leadership of Microsoft, and he enabled a significant investment towards cyber resilience, to the point where cyber risk was now embedded into the corporate strategy. Another example of good governance is JP Morgan Chase. Now, you may know that as a US-based bank. It is in fact one of the largest banks in the United States. And they applied their governance effectively to ensure that there is always a chief executive level cyber focus as it relates to cyber risk, meaning that there's a clear senior executive that has the responsibility for cyber risk. They invested billions towards cyber resilience, and they have effectively implemented regular board level reviews as it relates to the cyber resilience maturity. For JP Morgan, cyber resilience is treated as a business enabler and not as a sunk cost. Now, to achieve this level of effective governance, and I would even say cultural dynamics, requires a mindset shift. And as board members, we have to move from passive reporting to active, which involves challenging what is being reported, not necessarily being adversarial in terms of what management is presenting, but a disciplined approach to ensure that there is evidence to support what is being presented to the board. And let me expand a bit. Let's say you have a report that says that the incident response plan was tested effectively. So what should we do as a board member? What I would recommend is that you should ask some questions, namely, or specifically, what were the cyber threat scenarios tested? And are these threats listed as one of our top 3 cyber risks? When you say it was effectively tested, did we achieve our recovery time objective defined in our approved business continuity plan in restoring the critical business services or systems listed in that plan? And the other question is, were there any areas that need improvement, and how can we support you as a board? The approach here is not to be adversarial, as I mentioned. The principle behind these questions is to trust, but always verify what is being reported. Now, I want to expand in terms of a few other questions that the board should be asking towards cyber resilience and to ensure that they meet their oversight obligations. And I want to offer 5 additional questions. Number 1, what are our top 3 cyber scenarios, and can we truly survive them? Number 2, what is our time to detect and recover? And is this period acceptable to our operations objectives and to our customers? Number 3, Are we overly dependent on a single vendor or system as it relates to our security controls? Number four, what could force us to shut down operations tomorrow? And number five, when was our last independent cyber assessment? Now, I wanna I want to reflect on that last question, which is basically when was our last independent cyber assessment? Now, as we all know, organizations routinely conduct independent financial audits. Yet, many do not perform independent cyber assessments, even though cyber risk ranks among the top global threats, and we spoke about that before. To me, not implementing independent cyber assessments is not necessarily a technical gap. I actually think it's a governance failure. All right, so I recommend that you conduct at least annually an independent assessment to determine one, are the controls defined effective? Are there any other blind spots that we don't know about? And three, what level of comfort do we have that if we are under attack, we can effectively bring back up our critical services? Okay? So based on all that I've just shared, let us land or let's put everything together towards 5 recommendations I want to offer you as a board member to deliver on the 3 areas of accountability within your fiduciary responsibility. Recommendation number 1, make cyber risk a standing agenda item. Not quarterly reports, but continuously. Focus on the top 3 to 5 cyber risks relevant to your organization. Why? Well, most published cyber risk reports indicate that close to 90% of reported data breach or breaches were 1, preventable, and 2, related to current exposures that already exist within the organization. All right. Focus on conducting periodic scenario-based threats-related testing. And then 4, focus on what I would call human vulnerability indicators, such as phishing susceptibility. And what that means is when you conduct your phishing campaign, your scheduled phishing campaign, and let's say you have identified where 40% of your staff actually clicked on the link, then you would know by way of pure mathematics or probability that you have a probability of 40% chance of a similar attack being successful. So these are the areas you need to focus on. What is also linked to what I'm saying is that most of the attacks that we are seeing are really driven through successful stealing of user credentials, meaning either through phishing or social engineering, the attacker has been able to get your username and passwords, and that has allowed them to breach into your organizational critical systems. Recommendation number 2, shift from security to resilience. Ensure that incident response is tested. Business continuity includes your cyber scenarios, and recovery capabilities are effectively measured that must be linked to business outcomes. The objective here is not to be, in a constant panic mode, but to assume that you will be breached at some point and that you will be ready. Recommendation number 3, demand business level metrics. As it relates to your reports, move away from these technical languages. All right, boards should hear what is our financial exposure based on the cyber risk, what can be the operational downtime impact if we were breached, meaning if this particular breach occurs, how long will be down? Are we being practical in the recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives we have set for ourselves to restore our critical services and continue operations? Now, why I'm including this is that I have seen many business continuity plans and incident response plans that says we are in fact can bring up our critical systems within 2 hours. But when you look at the complexity, you look at the processes, and equally you look at the limited resources, that 2-hour time frame is in fact not possible. So as a board member, challenge the recovery time objective and recovery point objective. Recommendation 4, Establish independent assurance. Use third parties to conduct cyber resilience assessments, observe your tabletop exercises, and help you to execute adversarial simulations. And recommendation number 5, link cyber resilience to executive performance. Tie resilience to your executive scorecards and, of course, compensation structures. As we all know, what gets measured and rewarded gets done. So, this is a closing question I want to leave you as a board member with. If your organization were breached tonight, how confident are you that you will be able to operate in the morning? Why such a question? Well, as I've mentioned in the past, cyber resilience is not about preventing every attack. It's also about ensuring your organization can detect attack faster, respond smarter, and recover stronger. Okay? So we have come to the end of another episode in our Cyber Resilience for Leaders series. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. I'm your host, Anthony Subara. Until next time, keep well and stay resilient. Hi, if this episode brought any value to you, we kindly ask you share it with others. If you need help on your cyber resilience journey, you can find us on www.stratos-cyber.com. Until we meet again, keep well.